Welcome back to the Marc Claire Show. My guest today is the prolific author of many, many books involving hidden history and political corruption and conspiracy. He is also a podcaster making regular appearances on America Unplugged with our friend Billy Ray Valentine, as well as his own program, I Protest. I'm very pleased to welcome Donald Jeffries. Don, welcome to my show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, Donald. And you've been in this game for a little bit now, writing about these topics. And I really just want to start at the beginning, or your beginning anyway. How did you first get a hint of interest in this idea of uncovering hidden history, political corruption, and conspiracy, and that sort of thing?
Well, the JFK assassination is the one that got me started down these rabbit holes. I was a teenager when I volunteered for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry in the mid-'70s. And I never looked back since. You know, when I first started reading the books about it and getting to know Mark Lane a little bit, and he was a hero of mine. He was the most famous critic of the Warren Report. And, getting to go to the archives and hold the alleged rifle and the magic bullet and see the clothes and JFK's clothes and have a private sitting room to view the Zapruder film Framed by Fran Advance. And that was kind of giddy stuff for an 18-year-old. And it just hooked me. And, I just kept reading more and more. And I was always a writer. At that time I was writing songs. I thought I could be a singer-songwriter and poems, and started to mess around with a novel that later was published. But so I knew I was going to write something. I wasn't sure that I would write my own JFK book or anything like that. But so I kept up with this. And then as time went on, especially during the 90s, I mean, that was conspiracy central. There was so much going on during the Clinton years with the body count and Vince Foster and Waco, Oklahoma City, JFK Jr. I mean, all these things I covered in my first nonfiction book, Hidden History. So I started, being interested in all these things and realizing they had a connecting line. This was like an unending stream of what I call organized corruption, or basically organized crime. So I've never looked back then. So I got to the point where I really don't trust anything. I realized after wanting to be a journalist when I was very young that how bad our state-controlled media is, and it is really indistinguishable from TASS and Pravda at the height of the Soviet Union, because they just regurgitate, the talking points of authorities. And I started realizing that these people don't tell the truth about anything. So later when Donald Trump would come along and call them a fake news, I mean, it was a perfect description of them. So, I just started cranking out the books when I had my first novel published. And then I still consider myself more of a novelist. But, excuse me, the other two, which I finished, which I think are really good, I just wasn't able to get them published. And I was frustrated, so I just said, I'm going to try nonfiction. So Hidden History, which is still by far my bestseller and been really successful, was just kind of a compendium of all the things, all the books I'd read, all the things I'd studied for decades. And people liked it. And so I started writing more. So I'm up to 8 books now, and there more to come. There's a couple more. One's going to be published before the anniversary of the JFK assassination, another JFK book, and then I'll have one. The next basically installment, the third basic volume of Hidden History, will be out next year. So there's never a lack of anything to write about. I mean, you can look online any day and find just new stories of conspiracies and cover-ups. I mean, it never stops. These people this is what they do. It's a way of doing business for them.
It's pretty fascinating that you would be that up close and in person to a conspiracy like the JFK assassination at such a young age. I think a lot of people like me, when we're at that age of 18, we kind of just take in what we hear from our parents, the media, school. We sort of take things at face value. At least I did at that age. It was only later in my life that I started to, get a sniff for some things and become a little more cynical about everything. I'm curious how that was for you, just being at that young age and being directly exposed to what was really an unfolding conspiracy, even at the time, what you might even call one of the first modern conspiracies. I think the term conspiracy theory came out to sort of smear Warren Commission critics, but maybe you could dig a little bit deeper into that, because it's pretty appropriate, because actually last episode I did a whole discussion sort of laying the groundwork for the JFK assassination. So maybe we can sort of dovetail into more of the details from there.
Sure. Well, it's, I came from a Catholic family, and I was 7 when JFK was assassinated, and it's one of my first memories watching nonstop coverage on television. And even at 7 years old, I was influenced by my father and all the relatives around. I mean, nobody thought Oswald did it. So, I mean, my Catholic family was grieving. Most of them thought Johnson did it because they hated Johnson. And so that was my mind at that point. Early on, I was predisposed to think that they got it wrong. I didn't understand why they got it wrong or anything, but it wasn't until later as a teenager that even though I was a Kennedy fan, I always rooted for the Kennedys just because of my roots. I don't know. They're just kind of my, I'm a fanboy. I admit it. They're like one of the only families I like in public life. But um, I started reading some of these critical books like Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane. And I realized, wow, I knew Oswald didn't do it, but man, I didn't know it was this obvious. And so, Mark, when I was in Mark Lane's group, I just was still naive. And I thought, because we were supposed to try to lobby Congress and call local reporters and things like that. And I just, again, in my naive 17, 18-year-old mind, I'm thinking that, well, I just have to let them know. They don't know. For some reason, they're just not aware of this.
Right. You maybe still had that Schoolhouse Rocks mentality of government, where if you just write your congressman, then they'll surely take care of this mistake.
Yeah, yeah. I actually thought that once they figured what they thought Watergate was big. This is but it was very disillusioning to realize that they had no interest. And then once I started reading up on other things, to realize why they had no interest, because as Sinclair Lewis said 100 years ago, it's hard to convince a man of something when his job depends on him not understanding it. And that's what these journalists do. Their job depends on them not investigating anything. So, and that starts with the JFK assassination. So, but I wouldn't have been able to produce really any of my books or publish any of them. There wouldn't be any reason to write them if we had a free press. Because all I'm doing, the hidden history, it's not really hidden. It's there. Mm-hmm. You can find it. It's just, it's distorted. It's covered up. It isn't talked about very often. So somebody like me comes along, and I can find an audience for people that say, "Wow, I didn't know that," or "I forgot that," or something. Because it's hiding in plain sight. But if they were doing their job, I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd be writing something else, I guess. But I wouldn't be writing these books because there wouldn't be a need for them. People like me are filling a void that exists to the extent that there are still book readers. If I had done this 50, 60 years ago and gotten these books published then I would probably be pretty wealthy because there were that many more readers. Hidden history, especially based on the sales I have now, it would have sold probably at least 500,000 copies 50, 60 years ago. But unfortunately, we have fewer readers. So we have to, I'm very grateful for the readers that are out there. But as you know, it's just...
there's just fewer humans reading, unfortunately, nowadays.
Yes, it is. It is, especially younger people with the internet.
They're wasting their time on podcasts and then stuff like this.
Yeah. So that's why we have to do all these other things. And we can't just depend on books. Why I write on Substack regularly, and I have a paid option there as well, because you have to try to make a living as best you can. I'm a full-time writer now.
Well, very good. I mean, it's great that that you're able to get enough support to do this full time, because I think work like this is so important. And you said something that's really key there, that, when you say hidden history, this is hidden in the sense that it's buried underground and you have to go break into some chamber to gain the secret knowledge. The knowledge is available. It's just not propagated by the systems that our society generally trusts, our education systems, our media systems, our government systems. They're the ones that hide it, but they're not hiding it so much as just not telling you about it. If anything, it's more like omission, would you say?
Right. I mean, until now, it's getting harder to write these books, though, because in the beginning, it was very easy because you could find, and I try to find mainstream sources, and you usually can, because if you don't have a mainstream source, the readers say, "Oh, what is that?" Right. That's not a credible source. So most of the time, you can find a mainstream source, but the problem is now the search engines are a part of the censorship. So it's very, I have a couple of researchers that have helped me out a lot. Peter Seacosh and Chris Graves have done a great job they just send me stuff. I can't afford to pay them, and they're just wonderful, and they're better than I am at finding this stuff now, because you have to go backdoor, and I don't know what they do, but it's harder. So just finding a simple thing for a citation, let's say, okay, I know this particular thing, I know this is true, but okay, where's the source for it? It used to be you could find it. Now it's much more difficult because they know what you're looking for.
Right.
For instance,
So
when I was,
it exists out there, but if you're typing it into Google and trying to find it, they're just hiding that result. So you have to figure out some
right.
alternative ways to find it.
And they do it all the time. For instance, I mean, just even things like I remember when I was writing, I write for American Free Press, the newspaper as well. It's another way I make a little money, but last free independent newspaper in America. But I was writing an article about when the Washington Post printed a retraction, I guess a couple years ago, based on because they had misquoted or taken out of context Donald Trump's quote on the phone call to the Ukraine or something, and they admitted that they had. So they put a retraction in the paper. I searched and searched and searched. You could not get a link to that retraction online. They blocked you everywhere. Eventually, I found that in the back door, a different kind of way. But that's what even something like that, or when I was writing Masking the Truth, my book about COVID, my latest book, which is by far my most controversial, and they are shadow banning that. They are doing things of that they haven't done with any of my other books. They're playing so many games and blocking it on search engines, and it's they have it listed for $999 on Apple Books. I mean, crazy stuff like that to discourage people from buying it. But I was trying to talk, mention about the Vaccine Immunity Act that was passed in the '80s, which really led to where we are today. And it was Anthony Fauci was instrumental, was right in the middle of that. Well, I was trying to find something touching on that. They block everything online, anything online touching on Fauci and that 1986 act. You can't find it. And it's that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. They make it really much harder to do the research that used to be pretty, fairly easy to do. But now, it's it's obviously it can still be done. I'm still getting these books out there, but it just is a little more work involved now, and it shouldn't be that way. But that's the way I think Google just signed some new agreement with the World Health Organization again because they really, really are censoring stuff to do with COVID. But it's discouraging to people that want to produce these things because you have to depend on the search engines, and almost all of them. People have sent me. I've got like a dozen alternative search engines I use. None of them work right. I mean, most of them are better than Google, but all of them use Google's algorithm to one degree or another. And that's the problem is that, they have an algorithm there. They know what you're looking for. If you're looking for something that they don't want you to know, then they'll block it.
Maybe we'll just have to go old school one of these days and, go back to searching in libraries and reading the old newspapers with the microfiche.
Yeah,
and
microfiche.
Kind of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, may have to go back to that. But God, I mean, my heart goes out to the people that the old school researchers that used to have to do that, because obviously it would take a lot longer if you you had to go to. And I did that not before, because the internet was obviously already here when I started writing, but way back when. I remember going and doing research, and it wasn't easy because then you had to again, you didn't have even any word processing. You had to take longhand notes of things.
Right.
Couldn't email yourself, and so it was just imagine how those writers were. But that's why I have great respect for writers in the past. They could write all their stuff in longhand. Now we go have word. We have a spell check and all that stuff that makes it a lot easier. They didn't have that back then. So it's in most respects, it's the easiest time by far to be a writer because of the way you can write now on Microsoft Word or whatever, and the tools you have there. But on the other hand, they do put a lot of impediments up in when you're writing the kind of stuff I am. I imagine if you're just writing mainstream stuff that, you can find anything you want on Google, but you can't when you're looking at controversial stuff.
It wouldn't surprise you if someday they'll be able to live edit your own document. If you're working on you're typing in your house, they're plugged in. Oh, we're just going to remove that line. See if Don notices.
Yeah. Well, that's they play. I mean, right now, Twitter and Facebook, I've been shadow banned there and I still am. Somebody just told me the other day, and I posted something last night about going on the show last night, and he said I just got it this afternoon. And some people would get my posts and tweets 3 or 4 days later, after I promoted whatever it was I was promoting. People have told me on Twitter, God, I've had to follow you like 8 times. They just keep unfollowing people automatically on there to hold my numbers down. So it's very frustrating. Thank goodness for Substack, where I write regularly, donaldjeffries.substack.com. I protest is what it's called, just like my show that live streams every Friday on Rockfin and on my YouTube channel from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. But That's the only place I'm not shadow banned. Even there, they're starting to play some games. I have people all the time telling me, when you write something, I'm supposed to get a notification and it isn't coming, or it goes automatically to my spam folder, even though I go in there and set it and say this isn't spam over and over again, it keeps going back to spam. So we may see. So if Substack falls, it's going to be very frustrating because that's really the only large scale platform out there that I know of that you can still have freedom of speech.
Right. Well, we'll have to see how it all plays out. It seems like no matter what sort of levels of censorship there are, there's always something else that emerges that people can kind of go to at the end of the day. So I guess it's kind of a pendulum that just keeps swinging back and forth.
Yeah.
I do want to head back to the JFK rabbit hole a little bit, and then maybe see where it leads. So, I mean, as someone who's been immersed in that assassination, since, like you said, since one of your first memories, since being 7 years old, you said it was obvious that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. It's interesting to hear you say that it was obvious even to like friends and family at that time, because that's interesting to hear, like the public sentiment, or at least maybe among Catholics or Kennedy fans. But overall, this time with another book coming out focusing on the subject, what are some of the conclusions you've come to in terms of the specific actors involved and the specific reasons involved in the assassination of JFK? Because there are a lot of people that agree it's not Lee Harvey Oswald, but then from there there's a whole smorgasbord of ideas of what really went down.
Well, I've never, I tell people all the time when they say who killed JFK, and I say, well, begin with the fact that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. So whatever else there, and they really didn't investigate.
Do you think he had any involvement at all, or do you think he was completely set up?
No, he was connected, because I believe in this book that we're writing. It's going to be called "Pipe the Bimbo in Red," after one of the more colorful quotes of Dean Andrews, because I have a connection to Dean Andrews' son. He's the beatnik lawyer that was played by John Candy in JFK. He's become a good friend of mine, so he talks for the first time, and so we use one of his father's more colorful quotes. And there's a lot of focus on him and all the other players in New Orleans, because I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was connected through his intelligence work. I think it's obvious that he was some kind of an undercover agent, FBI, CIA, maybe both, maybe ONI. But and I think he was, as Jim Garrison believed, that he was on assignment at the time of the assassination. He was told there was a plot that was brewing in New Orleans to assassinate Kennedy, and he infiltrated that plot. Now, that plot included David Ferrie, Clay Shaw at the head of it, Jack Ruby, Kerry Thornley, his Marine buddy, Sergio Arcacha Smith, and lots of other Cuban players. But a lot of people mistake them. They weren't the conspirators. I mean, because most of them had intelligence backgrounds as well. So I personally will go beyond Garrison. I believe all of them, except maybe Shaw. I think Shaw was the connection to the higher level people, because Shaw in this book will show he had some really impressive connections. He was a powerful guy, and but the rest of them were beneath him in terms of it. So why was he consorting with them? But the rest of them, I think, we know Jack Ruby had been FBI informant. David Ferrie had mafia CIA connections. I think that they may have all been told the same thing, that, hey, there's a plot brewing to assassinate the president, infiltrate this group. And they just played them off against each other. I think personally that's probably what happened. But now it's interesting that all of those people in New Orleans, they all are on the record. They all hated Kennedy, and they would have loved to have him assassinated, except for Oswald. Oswald's the only one on the record who said nothing but good things about JFK. So it's very odd that the one they chose as the patsy is the only one who wouldn't have approved his assassination. But that's what I call the ground level plotters. And I think that's Garrison focused on that because that's all he could focus on.
Right.
Because the people above them, when you look at the people, excuse me, I think the plot was very similar to what Mr. X, who was based on Fletcher Prouty's character in JFK, played by Donald Sutherland. I think it was very similar to that. Something in the wind, someone in the Pentagon, someone in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the upper echelons of the CIA. These people all make it, they say nothing's on paper. It's not really said. It's just whispered in the wind.
You're not going to find the memo.
No. That's why people talk about the files. They're not going to have. It's not going to be detailed. Right. But
if they release the JFK files, it's not like it's going to show the plotting and the planning and the truth. Yeah. It might just show some aspect of the investigation we haven't seen, or who knows.
Right. So I think what you're looking at there is people that people ask me, okay, who were above that, who were involved? Well, I think the Secret Service had to be involved. because they didn't do their job and they stood down. There's no question about that. And I emphasize the Secret Service all the time. Emory Roberts, who was in charge of the motorcade at ground level, he's the one who called them off and didn't let them go jump and try to protect JFK and do their job. I think William Greer, the driver of the car, was involved. Unquestionably, he stopped, or at least severely slowed down, and turned around and watched Kennedy get his head blown off after he'd already heard gunfire. These people are trained to speed out of there. He didn't do that. So in a real investigation, though, the Secret Service would have been the first people questioned and grilled. They weren't, because there was no investigation. So you have those guys, and if you want somebody in the White House, and I think we can prove conclusively was a conspirator who had foreknowledge, that would be National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy. McGeorge Bundy had written a new National Security Action Memorandum 273. He wrote it the day before the assassination, November 21st. He drafted it. He had to have known that JFK would have never signed it and would have fired him, because it completely turned on its head the recent material in National Security Action Memorandum 263, which started to delineate JFK's withdrawal policy from Vietnam. How they were going to have the first 1,000 troops out by, 1965, and the end of 1963, all forces out by 1965. So this was a revolutionary thing, and I think that was the main reason for his assassination, probably. But nobody in their right mind who expected JFK to remain in office would have drafted something like that, because they had known the president wouldn't sign it, because it completely contradicted his feelings of what he wanted done. But it's out there in the record. So, of course, he was killed, before he saw the memo, and LBJ was happy to sign it, and the rest is history. So I think McGeorge Bundy, that alone, and also McGeorge Bundy he wasn't in Dallas, he was in the White House Situation Room on November 22nd. And JFK's cabinet, very curiously, were all in the air flying to Hawaii for a cabinet meeting. It was kind of a strange thing. But so McGeorge Bundy radioed them on the plane and assured them, before anything was known about Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm not even sure Oswald was arrested, or they announced to public because lots of people were arrested. Most of them, bums, and we don't know some of them. But he assured JFK's cabinet that there was no conspiracy and they had the right guy. Now, he could not possibly have known that unless he had pre-knowledge. So you want somebody, that's a name. I think it's pretty obvious Allen Dulles had pre-knowledge, J. Edgar Hoover. But, I don't know. It's hard to prove some of these things, but clearly you look at who covered it up. And, the FBI led by Hoover did, and the Secret Service was still destroying evidence and not turning it over in the 1990s when the Assassination Records and Review Board tried to get some evidence. They destroyed evidence then. So they were still covering up. So the Secret Service at some level was involved as well. So, I mean, those I believe were the people, and I think you have people, some generals in the Pentagon that certainly wanted JFK killed, so would have been involved, and other people high up in the CIA would have as well. So I think it's, it's pretty obvious that this was not any kind of a low-level conspiracy, but even many so-called conspiracy theorists like to say, well, it was some rogue elements of the CIA. No, rogue elements of the CIA can't continue to have every mainstream journalist still cover up 60 years later.
For 60 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's powerful forces. So this was a huge conspiracy. And I'm never going to back off of that. This was a huge conspiracy involving very powerful forces. But first of all, you have to admit that they obviously the official version is complete disinformation. That's where I start. Is that whatever else the investigation, there was no investigation, but what little they did inadvertently proved that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't do it, whoever did.
There seem to be certain hallmarks with a lot of these public events where there's confusion in the beginning and the chaos of the event, but then shortly thereafter, all of the officials seem to have the exact conclusion. They've got the one guy. Any reports of another guy, whether we're talking about Timothy McVeigh, it doesn't really matter. This is right. You can see the same story sort of play out over and over. We have the certainty of the story, and then anything that derives from that story is you're in conspiracy land. You're a wild conspiracy theorist. It doesn't matter what kind of evidence comes out. It doesn't matter anything. It's just that first story seems to be the one it's the official one. I guess that's what we call the official story.
Right. And that's what much of my work is. And when I do these, I show whether it's Vince Foster, for instance. That's a perfect example. The first, there's a Secret Service memo in the Vince Foster case where the Secret Service details finding Vince Foster's body in his car. Now that contradicts everything about the so-called crime scene because he supposedly was found on the ground at Fort Marcy Park. So that's an early story. Now, how does the Secret Service make a mistake like that? Impossible. Obviously, they can't. Say in JFK assassination, you have reports of other guns found, other kinds of guns, and you have the two deputies that found the rifle on the 6th floor, Eugene Boone and Seymour Weitzman. Seymour Weitzman later ended up in a mental institution because he literally went crazy after it because he couldn't deal with the fact it was a huge conspiracy. He was living a lie. But both of them independently signed sworn affidavits that the gun they found was a German Mauser. Now, of course, we're told it was an Italian Mannlicher Carcano. And as Mark Lane said, when he testified before the Warren Commission, he asked that the rifle be brought out. And he said, gentlemen, I'm no expert on weapons, but I can tell this isn't a German weapon very easily because right on the barrel is stamped Made Italy. So, you don't make those kinds of mistakes. And that's the kind of thing. And so I've always said that if they had brought Oswald to trial, now, if they had brought him to trial, it would have been not that much different from our corrupt courts today, where he wouldn't have been in an honest courtroom. So this wouldn't have mattered. But if the rule of law prevailed, the first thing a good defense attorney would have done would have moved that the alleged murder weapon not be allowed to be admitted in the record. He'd say, Your Honor, there's no chain of possession for this. We have two sworn affidavits that the weapon found on the 6th floor was an entirely different weapon, a German Mauser. Where is the chain of possession for this Italian Mannlicher Carcano? It doesn't exist. There's no chain of possession for it. So you can't just, supposedly, if the law works the way it's supposed to, you can't bring something like a murder weapon into the record without there being a trail. Where did this come from? There is no where did this come from for that Italian Mannlicher Carcano. In fact, it's contradicted by the two people found it who described it as a completely different weapon. So there's so many problems like that, the JFK assassination. Same thing with the ammunition, the magic bullet, for instance. Even if you go past the gymnastics and the impossibilities of it turning in midair and all that stuff and entering 6 inches below the back and from 6 floors above and somehow exiting the throat without striking anything and then going on. I mean, complete nonsense, fairy tale. But even if you go beyond that, how was it introduced into the record? I've had a lot of this in my writing. I'll have more in the next hidden history volume next year. But we're not even sure the guy who's been attributed to finding it actually found it. He didn't know where he found it. He kept trying to. He gave it to his boss, who kept trying to interest the FBI and the Secret Service there in the book. Nobody had any interest in it. I mean, read my book, Hidden History. It went through so many hands who didn't initial it. Again, chain of possession becomes impossible. It got back to D.C. It was carried back to D.C. in the coat pocket of Richard Johnson, Secret Service agent Richard Johnson, who later, when Vince Palermo, a very good researcher on the Secret Service, when he interviewed him decades later and asked him about that, Richard Johnson didn't remember taking the bullet back. Now, just think of this. This is the highlight of, it's got to be the highlight of a Secret Service agent's career. I transported one of the bullets used in the assassination.
Right. It's a story you would probably tell over and over for the rest of your life.
He didn't remember it. So that's what we're looking at. The chain of possession here is absurd. They did not. So for the JFK assassination, literally there was no evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald because all of it was tainted like that. None of it came would come into the courtroom naturally. So a real attorney would have had it all thrown out because there's no chain of possession for it. But I know it wouldn't have worked like that because the law is corrupt, and obviously, and it was corrupt then, and so he probably would have been railroaded like Timothy McVeigh, who you mentioned was later, or James O. Ray, or somebody like that, the Boston bomber, people like that. All these people got show trials where they got no representation at all, where there were huge questions involved in all those cases. But again, the attorneys that represent them typically are either public defenders or they're people who are hired because of their ability to go along with the narrative and not actually attempt to defend them.
One criticism that you often hear when discussing, I guess, what you'd call like high level conspiracies like this is people will say, there's just no way that that many people could be involved. Like the number of people it would take to cover up all these little things could be
Yeah.
involved. And also, and that none of them, after all this time, after these 60 years, would be speaking out or would have said something on their deathbed or whatever it may be. What's your response to that criticism that, look, I get
Yeah.
what you're saying. It might not even be a criticism about any of the facts. It might just be more of a, I can't wrap my head around this. But what do you believe? How do you believe this kind of thing gets pulled off? I guess is the
Yeah, well,
question.
people regurgitate that all the time, and that's the "someone would have talked" line. I hear it all the time, and my point is, well, lots of people have talked. Lots of people have talked. In the JFK assassination alone, unbelievable. There was a huge body count. Tons of people that talked died unnaturally. I mean, it happened repeatedly. Dorothy Kilgallen, a very famous reporter, was obviously murdered, and she was a television star on What's My Line, and she was writing a book. The only mainstream reporter that was writing a book about the JFK assassination. She broke a lot of the early material that Mark Lane and people like that used in her column. So it would have been a bombshell book because of her name. She died very mysteriously, obviously murdered. So there are lots of people like that who were talking in this case and others. And you go through the decades. People like the
Maybe another
DC.
case of where it's all hidden by an omission. Like there are people out there saying things, but they're not getting the New York Times headline.
Right, because the media is involved in covering it up. So they don't care what they're saying. They're not looking for a story. They're trained not to investigate anything. So there are lots of people who talk. And again, people can read my books and look at the number of unnatural deaths that happened. These guys look at the decades later in the early 2000s, the DC Madam Deborah Jean Palfrey,
Mhm.
who had supposedly had a black book filled with all these powerful names that were coming to her brothel. And first of all, one of her girls was found hung, and hanged. And so she goes on Alex Jones' big show, and she comes on there and says, "Look, I want to say right now, I am not suicidal. I am not going to kill myself. If that happens, I didn't do it." So what happens? She kills herself. So she talked. The media wasn't interested in other than Alex Jones, and that's what happened. I mean, I have people on my show, my little show, I protest that are talking all the time. They're exposing whatever level of corruption they're involved with, municipal corruption sometimes, child protective services. I do a lot of shows on that. And people try to say, how do they have anywhere else to go? They can't go on any national television talk show. Tucker Carlson was the closest they came to that, and he's off the air now, where some of them, if they weren't too controversial, could go there. But someone would talk, and a lot of that is used for. I haven't written, for instance, about the Apollo moon flight, but I don't think we went. I think I completely buy into that. I think it's if people doubt that, read the late great Dave McGowan's "Wagging the Moon Doggy," still
And that's
online.
another one where you hear that similar criticism of
Well,
there's
yeah,
no way this many
right.
people could be involved.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That in something like that, you don't need that many people because you have a very few people that probably knew. The vast majority of people that you see working the computers and all that stuff, they were doing what they thought was their job.
Mhm.
They think it's really going on because they're not at high enough levels to know. So, I mean, this happens. It doesn't mean they're not part of the conspiracy.
And hardly anyone is the one designing the thing. Most people are doing a part, a little part here, a little job
Right.
here. So it's very easy to have them do a task, complete the task truly, and say, "Thank you very much for your part in this task. You did well." And then they see the thing on TV and they say, "Well, yeah, I did that little part right there."
Exactly. And so, it's they can play them off against one another. But yeah, someone would have thought that is their typical line. You can't keep a secret in Washington. Well, yeah. Well, you might be able to keep a secret about some titillating nonsense that doesn't involve anything, maybe, but you sure can keep a secret about child sex scandals and things like that that are really, if they want to expose something about somebody having an affair, maybe they would do that. But they're not going to touch on the really powerful stuff. So no, it's that's a very easy way for them to dismiss something and say, "Oh, that's crazy. Someone would have talked." No, it's many people have talked, and the ones that look, I know when I'm trying to write these books, what I really like to do, I love to try to touch base with the people that are left from these instances, and 99.9% of the time, we'll find their phone number or their email, more likely their phone number. 99.9% of the time, these are people that are indirectly involved. They're just connected with some witness or something. You call them up, phone's been disconnected, the number's been changed every time. And when on the rare occasions you get through to people, like I got through to Timothy McVeigh's father, he answered the phone, shockingly, but he wouldn't
just
talk.
Looked him up in the phone book.
Yeah. Wow. He wouldn't talk. And I said, look, man, I think you're from some. I sure he's heard it before. He's no, I've heard all that. I don't want to talk about it anymore. He hung up. And that's what you get sometimes. But I have somebody, and I'll have that in the next book, that was connected with the JFK Jr. case. I was the first one to do a real investigation on that and demonstrate conclusively that was another Kennedy assassination. Unquestionably, JFK Jr. was assassinated. And he, this guy was connected to that. People have to read it. I'll just give you a little tidbit, though. He sent me a very nasty email, responded to me. And he's connected to, but you can see these guys calling me a kook and all this stuff, but not addressing what I was saying. But most of the time, they're scared and they don't want to talk. Like Seymour Weitzman, I mentioned him earlier. One of the deputies that found the weapon on the 6th floor, signed a sworn affidavit that it was a completely different weapon, German Mauser, went crazy, literally, ended up the House Select Committee on Assassinations found him in a mental institution during the 70s. And people tried to interview him and everything. He literally had been driven crazy. He didn't have kids. And so I tracked down his nephew, called him up, and I got him on the phone somehow. And he just shouted at me, I don't know nothing about, over and over again. And this is, again, at that time, it was 40 some years after the event, and or 50 years maybe. And I was saying, what is it? Why is it? Obviously the fear is still there. When I interviewed Scott Forbes, 9/11 guy who he worked in the Twin Towers, but he wasn't at work that day. But he had lots of information about strange power outages and all kinds of stuff him and his team had seen, and the authorities didn't want it. Mm-hmm. And again, someone would have talked. He talked. They lied about it and said, these are rumors. So they were there. They knew firsthand that it was true. So the fear, he had moved to England. The fear was still evident in his voice. And when you talk to these people, when you get through to them, you can see that there was still... that they're still scared when they talk, but most of the time they just change their number. They don't answer the phone. Like Timothy McVeigh's father, they just, say, no, I'm not going to talk. And so...
Do you think some of these people were directly threatened in some way, or they just have a general, I know that there's bad news around this and I don't want to get involved?
Well, we do know that tons of people have reported being threatened. JFK assassination, all these other instances as well. And again, I document these things in my book. People that said they got threatening phone calls, said the FBI threatened them, said the police threatened them. Anonymous phone, back when, you really can't do anonymous phone calls now, but back then they could. And, it'd be best you keep your mouth shut. Tons of people, especially the JFK assassination. So as I pointed out, who was doing that? If there was no conspiracy, who was making the threats? Lee Harvey Oswald's extended family? I mean, obviously it makes no sense. And who's making the threats in all these cases? What makes, after Jerry Parks, who was the head, and I'm going all over the place, but these things are all connected. Jerry Parks was the head of Governor Bill Clinton at Arkansas's security detail. And when Vince Foster was found dead, he told his whole family, he became, hysterical. And he told his whole family, I'm a dead man. I'm next. And he was. He was shot when he was riding his car, shot by unknown assailants in his car. So again, how did he know that? And how many people are just driving around that aren't members of the Bloods or Crips, or gang members, are just shot like that? So these things happen all the time. I became friends with Linda Ives, who was the mother of one of the boys on the tracks, Kevin Ives, one of the probably most famous members of the Clinton body count. 2 teenage boys that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time on a summer night and were killed because they witnessed a drug drop that was connected to Clinton. And the Linda sent me an email, and I put it in Hidden History, that had this incredibly long list of all their friends that had been killed too. I mean, a whole score of young people that had been murdered because of this.
Friends of those 2 kids.
Yes. Yeah. So again, these, they didn't get to talk. So these things are, it's obvious.
I mean, you can point to 8 dead kids and say, no, none of them said anything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Or maybe they didn't. That's why. But I mean, it's very convenient for them to be able to say no and want to talk. But believe me, they're people that talk definitely. And so that's not an argument, but that's the only argument they do have, because they can't argue on the evidence. For instance, if you're talking Vince Foster, then, if you say, okay, how do you explain the Secret Service memo that his body was found in the car? How do you make a mistake like that? There is no answer for that. So they'll just start, someone would have talked, or you're a conspiracy theorist. So, okay, that's not an answer. It's like calling someone a racist or a white supremacist. Right. That's basically what it is.
It's the conspiracy version of that, right?
Yeah, you're just a racist. Like, what? How do you, because I tell people all the time, I have no theory. Mm-hmm. I deal in facts. I publish these facts. They're inconvenient facts, but they can't be explained. And they're, the only way you can deal with them is to ignore them or to name call. And that's what they do, because you can't deal with things like that. You can't deal with, some of the things that people tell me all the time. Wow, you cover these cases that people forgot. People that, like, there was a case of R. Bud Dwyer, who was the Pennsylvania state treasurer, who was when Governor Richard Thornburg was in Pennsylvania. And Thornburg went on to become Bush the First's attorney general. So he was a man on the rise, totally corrupt. And this guy shot himself, noticeably, blew his head off at a public press conference. So that made, a big firestorm back in 86, 87, whatever it was. And the lurid detail, but every single outlet described it the same way. After reading a long, rambling note, that's how they invariably described it. He blew his head off.
They don't say what's in the note.
No. And the Spotlight, I write for the American Free Press now, which was what the Spotlight was before they were driven into bankruptcy by the Anti-Defamation League. But they were the only ones who covered it before the internet. They interviewed his wife, his widow, and they published the long, rambling note. The long, rambling note was a detailed indictment of Thornburg and his corruption, and how he was targeting him, and this was the only way out, which is stupid. He shouldn't have done what he did, but he thought naively that by doing it, the press that was assembled there would do something about it. Well, no, the press didn't do anything. They didn't report. It was a long, rambling note. So there's no innocent explanation for that. There's no theory in that. That just tells you that the press, the entire press corps, is like TASS and Pravda were in the Soviet Union. They are not allowed, even if they wanted to report news. What could be a bigger story than that? The state treasurer, blasts the governor for this incredible corruption and then shoots himself. And you don't mention that he talked about the governor? They literally didn't even mention Thornburg's name. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem you have. Or another one that's very similar, that Bo Greitz, who was the guy they based the character of Rambo on, in the Rambo movies. He came back. He was always trying to get POWs, another scandal, that we left behind. But he held a press conference again where he named, he had General Kun Saw, who was the international heroin drug of the Golden Triangle, heroin dealers. And he wanted to announce that General Kun Saw had fingered a particular person in the Reagan administration, Richard Armitage, who was the Assistant Secretary of Defense, as the guy involved in the heroin ring. Now, could anything be more, explosive than that? Again, everyone in the press conference, the Spotlight, were the only ones that reported what Greitz said. Again, there's no innocent explanation. There's no theory. They are TASS and Pravda. So that's why I'm able to write these books, because they did things like that over and over again.
Well, and that might be another criticism you hear. I hear stuff like this a lot. Well, okay, if there's these guys out there exposing the truth, whether it's you or other authors or whoever it may be, how come you guys are safe? People might say, how come they aren't targeting you? Or maybe
I get that too.
Maybe they have. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, what do you say to that?
I get that too. And I said, look, I'd hate to think that the only way that I can have any credibility is to be murdered. Because that's basically what you get that more in the alternative world.
You're alive, so this can't be true until you're dead. Then we'll believe you.
Yeah, well, you get that more in the alternative world. Fellow people, they say, well,
he's a fed because he's right.
Yeah, they would have knocked you off. So I don't know what to tell you, but
at some point you can't knock everybody off who's theorizing about JFK, for example.
Right, exactly, and it just it doesn't. All we can do is analyze the people that they did knock off, why they knocked off. I don't know, but I'm not changing my tune for anything. I don't cater my argument. I just report the facts, and I don't theorize. I don't, like I said, even JFK. I don't say I can name certainly can't name the gunman,
Right.
but I gave you a few names because I feel comfortable knowing that. But beyond that, we
And
don't
does
know.
the gunman himself really matter in the grand scheme? Because whoever
Right.
whoever the actual gunmen or gunman or whoever,
Right.
whatever gunwomen, who knows, whoever they were,
Right.
that's not who planned this. That's not who, they're a
Exactly.
foot soldier of some kind.
Exactly. And that's it. It really isn't. But same thing with with JFK Jr. I mean, there's no question. I think he was killed by the same people that killed his father and his uncle.
Yeah, I'd like to
But
dig into that one more because that's one I remember in the 90s. I want to say it was
99, yeah,
99.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I remember it, but that was before that's one I've never really dug into. It's one I've kind of assumed had some shenanigans around it, but I don't know much about it.
Well, and no one did before me, and it's a few others have since then. But I'll have a lot more of it on it in the next installment of Hidden History. But I mean, I talked to somebody I talked to his high school girlfriend and somebody in his adult inner circle that strongly said I have to remain anonymous. Again, the fear is there all the time. But I have other sources as well, said that behind the scenes, JFK Jr. alone among the Kennedy family members was obsessed with his father's assassination. He was reading the same books I was. He knew all about it. He knew it was a conspiracy, and he was biding his time. He was only 39 when he died, 38, yeah. And he was getting ready to enter politics. And Wayne Madsen, who's another journalist, told me that he had been called in for an interview with JFK Jr., which would have been a couple days after he died, for a job at George Magazine, and his assignment was going to be the JFK assassination. So imagine how explosive that would have been. JFK's son, in his magazine, features an in-depth investigation into his father's assassination. So they had to kill him. And it wasn't, people say it was George H.W. Bush or Hillary Clinton. It's not as simple as that. They don't, they don't do things like that. This was done by the same people that killed his father and killed his uncle. If JFK hadn't been assassinated, RFK wouldn't have been, JFK Jr. wouldn't have been. And, so that's the way it works. I mean, they know the dominoes, if the truth about any of these events comes to light, the dominoes start to fall.
Well, that's an interesting segue to another Kennedy Jr. that has just entered politics as well, which I'm sure has been a huge subject of conversation, especially in the alternative media.
Yes.
He's really a subject of a lot of what you mentioned a minute ago of, well, he wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't. I don't know what to think about the guy myself. A lot of what he says on the surface, I'm a big fan of, but I always have that who knows sort of mentality about this. But I'm curious your own thoughts on not just RFK Jr., but he himself has even referenced the CIA taking out his dad. So maybe you can, we touched on the other two JFKs. Maybe you can fill in that gap on RFK and how that progression went. Why must all these Kennedys be taken out? And is the current Kennedy any exception?
Yeah, well, better late than never for RFK Jr. But he certainly is bold, and I never thought I would live to see anyone, let alone a Kennedy.
I mean, that seems to be a common streak, at least among that line, the JFK, RFK line, is whether you agree with them or not. Clearly, they originated from a sort of an elite line of families, like many other political families. But there is a sense of boldness and honor that does seem to underlie a lot.
Yeah, and I think he, there's almost like a Shakespearean thing there, or a Greek tragedy, where it's, I've got to avenge, my father's death, my uncle's death. And he's not talking about JFK Jr. And Bobby and I are connected to so many different people. I mean, he knows who I am. He has at least a couple of my books I know, but for whatever reason, I can't get his ear. But he maybe thinks I'm too extreme. But he's good friends with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, who wrote the foreword to my book Masking the Truth, my recent book about COVID. And but I, of course, I'm predisposed to like him, and most of what he says is great, revolutionary. I'm troubled by his comments on Israel recently, especially where he's really, really.
That seemed like a big an advisor pulled him aside and said, "Hey, you got to make this one up, all right? If you're
it's really overkill. He's way too excessive with it. It just looks ridiculous. I don't know why he's doing it, but that bothers me a little bit. But not enough to negate all the other great stuff about him. I mean, just the fact that he's telling the truth about the vaccines, he's talking about the medical industrial complex, he's talking about our terrible foreign policy, and he's saying that the government killed JFK and RFK. I mean, you can't ask for too much more than that. So
Right. Right.
and he wants the border closed too. So he at this point he obviously has my support to whatever degree it is. But these presidents are selected, not elected. I can't imagine they would select RFK Jr. I don't think they seem to have stopped assassinating people, and people don't realize that the last assassination of a major political leader attempt was Reagan.
Yeah.
In
Wow.
1981. So that's a long time ago. And so they really have kind of changed course. I mean, otherwise, if they were still doing it, they would have killed Pat Buchanan or Ron Paul or
Do you think it's
somebody like
more that now
Trump.
they get far enough ahead of it on the front end? They're like, we're going to be a lot more locked down on who we let even get into these positions in the first place. So we don't have to do the whole
Yeah.
messy assassination. Now we got to kill 100 people and kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I think so. I think to some degree, but I think definitely. But they have other ways of doing it. And with Bobby, I don't know. I mean, I hope he's not compromised. The Israel thing troubles me. But beyond that, he's got a lot of great points, and he's connected to a lot of good people. Dennis Kucinich was a very courageous congressman, and that's his campaign manager. So I don't know what to think. I mean, I hope he has a chance, but I don't think he does, because I don't think they count the votes. But at the very least, he makes the campaign much more interesting. So I'm watching, like everybody else. I don't know where the script is going to take us, but at least for now, I find it compelling.
What do you think of Donald Trump in the context of what you said a minute ago, presidents being elected and not selected? Because it does seem in the case of Trump, one of two scenarios. Either they don't do assassinations anymore, so they're just doing everything else that they can do, or this is all part of the show of what Trump is being portrayed as. And I'm just curious your sort of thoughts on that.
Well, people can look on my Substack and see I've written and talked so much about what I call the Trumpenstein project. I call him Trumpenstein, and I believe he was created to tap into that innate populism out there, and I believe he was. And they gave him all this radical campaign rhetoric, which sounded great to me, and nobody had ever talked like that before. Then he had 4 years as president where he did nothing except tweet. He didn't do anything about immigration. He didn't do anything about bringing the troops home, infrastructure, all the stuff he promised. So he had 4 years already. He named nothing but swamp creatures to his cabinet, almost all never Trumpers. There weren't even people that supported him there. It was a joke, and I can only look at it as being scripted, and he's still playing this game. And he's effectively being indicted over and over again for nothing, for crazy stuff. And nothing's going to happen to him. But symbolically, they're indicting us. They're indicting dissent. And that's what's happening. With Alex Jones and him both, they're prosecuting the people. Should they ever decide to actually question this corruption, we'll prosecute you. And I think that's what they're doing to Trump. And there's no other explanation for it. I mean, it's like, was it 30 some more indictments the other day? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And virtually every one of the charges is a joke. But because of Trumpenstein was designed to, with a incredibly divisive personality, to divide the country, and that he's done. He's killed the third party movement, which was strong in 2016. Bernie Sanders tapped into a lot as well, but because of Trump's personality, everybody either hates him or loves him. So nobody is going to go for a third party candidate because they're fearful it'll either elect Trump or not elect him.
Right.
So
I mean, there used to be the pretty standard, oh my God, biggest election of our lifetime. We don't want the Republican, the Democrat, but now it's kind of on a higher level than that. It's like, oh my God, we must have Trump or we must not have Trump. And it's very hard to find something in between that, or even have an actual political discussion that isn't surrounding Trump.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I've said, that millions of people hate him for things he never did, and millions of people love him for things he never did.
Right.
And that's where we stand. Trey, I think he's an actor. He's a giant orange actor. I call him.
So you think he's a willing participant in this whole show, all the indictments, which is maybe why he's cool as a cucumber during all this?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I said that the last chance he had to prove there was an ounce of sincerity in him was when the first indictment in New York for the ludicrous rape case where the woman can't even remember the year it took place, and somehow they're indicting him on it. But again, would have laughed at any honest courtroom. DeSantis, who he has attacked curiously, DeSantis came out publicly and said, hey, this is a joke. I'm not going to extradite him. So Trump had protection there. If he could have given a giant middle finger to the system that he's supposedly trying to drain the swamp, And he could have said, screw you. I'm not, because DeSantis said, I'm not recognizing it. Mm-hmm. All he had to do is say, I'm not recognizing it. I'm just going to keep playing golf at Mar-a-Lago. And, if you want to precipitate the Civil War, bring it on. But no, his dumb ass goes to New York on the advice of his always terrible attorneys. And he has the worst attorneys ever, always. I've never seen a group of lawyers that he keeps regurgitating, but every one of them as bad as the other one. So some young girl he literally got her as a lawyer from a New Jersey parking garage. It's the president of the United States. He can't do better than that. So she told Tucker Carlson, no, I won't. Because Tucker kind of questioned it, saying, why is he going there? He's not obligated to do that. What I'm writing about in the book, the Pipe the Bimbo and Red, we're talking about all the witnesses that Jim Garrison tried to extradite to New Orleans, where the governors didn't extradite him. He never got them. So there's precedent for that. I don't know what would have happened, but it would have been a huge Fort Sumter moment for the alleged opposition to say, no, we're not going to recognize. Why would you recognize an indictment for a rape where the woman can't even come up with the year she was raped and is on record as bragging and laughing about it and joking about it years later on social media? This is a joke. But again, Trump, because he's an actor, he never does the logical thing. He never closes the border. He didn't do any of the stuff he said. At the last episode, he didn't pardon Assange and Snowden and Manning. No, he pardons the president of Death Row Records and a bunch of rappers and Blackwater executives. That's what he always does. He does the thing. He throws you a curveball, and his supporters still remain loyal. But he could have fired a shot heard around the world doing that. And I knew he wouldn't. But I thought, okay, let's just give him a chance to see it. And sure enough, he marched up there, and wow. You really thought you had a chance in a New York courtroom, really? And so it's terrible because he's the person that still epitomizes the opposition. He's the opposition to this madness, and that's the only one they're giving us. There is nobody else. So who else is there that has a big platform? And that's why millions of people still believe in him. I don't argue with him too much, but next time he's gonna really do. So he had 4 years and he didn't do anything for some mysterious reason. But next time you think he's really going to do it. Come on, it's just ridiculous. The entire premise is so. I think we need to start local and try to work up because I don't think there are any answers in the national political arena unless RFK Jr. somehow. But I don't think they'll allow that either.
Well, Don, it'll certainly be interesting to see how all this plays out because I think if there ever was any legitimacy to Trump, as you mentioned, we can probably list 50 things he would have done if there was an ounce of sincerity. Intervening with the January 6th people, saying something, for example, anything like that.
Right.
There's a whole hours of podcasting we could do about it. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out because if his purpose is to suck away the energy, well, mission accomplished because even with the mainstream media, 8 years ago in 2016, they made the election all about Trump then. And the leaked sort of reason for that was, well, he was the Pied Piper candidate. The Clintons sort of promoted him along with CNN because they felt he would be the easiest candidate to beat. He's a joke. So we'll promote him for that purpose. And then that got out of hand. That's kind of the storyline. I don't know how much of that is true, but that's like what the leaked documents and that sort of thing indicated. But if they're doing this again, because every time you see a conversation, a political debate, when they're interviewing Republican candidates, the only thing they do is ask them about Trump. It's the only thing they do. So they're clearly trying to make him the focus of it, which is why he was the candidate the first time. So they're clearly trying to put him back there, even while all these indictments are coming.
Yeah. That's right.
Which
I couldn't agree more.
Certainly speaks to your theory, the Trump sign theory, for sure. Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on, and you're gonna hang out a little bit more. We're gonna dive into this milk-filled room and see how much weirder we can get on some of this stuff. But I really do appreciate your overall work. I think work like this is very important. Actually, one more thing I do want to toss out to you, actually, because this is something that's on my mind all the time. I've always had an interest in this sort of stuff, the hidden history things, political corruption, this sort of things for a long time. But a thought that's always been in my mind, especially now that I talk about this more regularly in a public manner, and I'm someone who puts a lot of the stuff out there, is I think to myself, so what is the end game of trying to expose all this stuff to people. And of course, at my core, I think the truth is important. It's important to put things out there. It's important to, to inform people about what's really going on. But if I try to follow that thought process, I sometimes I don't know what the end game necessarily is. And I do wonder sometimes, does it just discourage people when you're exposing all this corruption? What can people actually do with this information that'll be productive, I guess is my question.
Well, yeah, people ask me that all the time, and I don't know. Winston Smith in 1984 was still my favorite book of all time, and it's great to be reading it now because we're living through a lot of it, and beyond that, we're in Orwellian times, and all that's missing are the Big Brother posters. But Winston Smith, when he first starts writing against the state, communicating, he says about how he knows who and how, he knows how he knows everything, but he doesn't know why. And I'm still asking myself that decades later after I first read that book, I don't know why. I don't know why they do the things they do, because they have absolute power. The absolute power. They had the people trained and conditioned. Look what we just came off with 2 years of COVID, where they had them, they took over the entire world without a single shot being fired.
Well, that's a great example of, how do you get so many people in on it? How many people, you got the whole world on it, not that long ago. So,
well, yeah, I'm saying that's, so I don't know if there were any naysayers, but certainly if there were, they didn't, I don't know who they were, because everybody instituted these absurd lockdowns. Everybody put these ridiculous masks on. Everybody did the 6 feet separation. I mean, insanity, total insanity. And that was the most disillusioning thing for me. I knew we were outnumbered. I didn't know we were outnumbered by that much. And so why people need to still be interested in it, but you're right. I mean, I tell people at some point, I think I'm just writing and just for my own entertainment or something. It's cathartic to write it out, because obviously I already know all this stuff. How many more times can I say how bad things are and how corrupt they are and prove another instance of a cover-up or whatever, a conspiracy? But people seem to enjoy it. It reinforces it. And I think at some point you hope that you're going to reach a person here or there who didn't know about it, or maybe somehow you can wake up. It's hard to do.
It's probably easy to forget, being someone like you or I, me on the interest end, you on the research end, that at some point you almost forget that a lot of people don't know anything about this stuff. You take so much of it for granted, and you never know what's going to be. Your book might be that one that they stumble upon. My podcast episode might be the one thing that someone stumbles upon that sends them down a journey of some kind.
Right. That's the hope. That's the hope, is to get a normie. And it's not easy to do, because they're conditioned not to think, but that's the only hope we have. Because I've said nothing's ever going to change until there are more us than more them. There has to be more people awake than more people asleep. And right now there are a lot more people asleep. And if COVID didn't wake them up, I don't know what will, but most of my friends and I think that, we have to try to do something like start local and try to see if we can get something going honestly at the bottom tiers of government. I don't know if that's possible, because we're not very successful with the school boards. I thought maybe we could really overturn some of the madness on the school boards, but I don't know how successful that's been so far. But if we can't do it at that level, then I don't know what we can do. We can, a couple of my friends want to just start, local communities and with local, commerce and bartering and all that stuff. And that may be the way we have to, especially if they go to digitalized currency, which they're probably going to do. So if they do that, that's going to effectively, cut into all of our wealth that people are doing, because we're not going to have access to our money, because our social credit score is going to be so low, because we can't stop these thoughts of ours.
Don, this podcast ain't going to help our future social credit score. I'll tell you that.
No. Everything I'm on just lowers my social credit score.
Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your work. Feel free, before we hop on over to the smoke-filled room for premium subscribers, feel free to let everybody know all the best ways they can find your work.
Well, the best way is on Substack. Is the only place I'm not shadow banned. My website is donaldjeffries.media. But if you go to Substack, donaldjeffries.substack.com, it's I Protest. You can subscribe to me there and support me that way. There's a pay option, but I'm a populist, so there's no paywall. You get everything for free too. If you want to help, that's great. Lots of people do. My book, Masking the Truth, How COVID-19 Destroyed Civil Liberties and Shut Down the World, forwarded by Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, is facing obstacles everywhere. They are doing everything they can to stop that book from getting out there. People are getting it, but we need more people to spread the word. So suggest that to your libraries. The libraries are putting up a huge wall. They don't want to put it in there. But if you overwhelm the algorithm, if they get enough requests, they will. A couple already have. So those are the best ways that people can help support me.
Can you just can I just show up at a library with a bunch of Don Jeffries books and donate them and say, hey, put these in your library? Or is there more of a bureaucracy?
Well, sure, you can do that, but every library has an online website, and you can just go and suggest a book. And if enough people suggest my book or my books, it's happened. They'll get overwhelmed by the numbers, and they will look past what the subject matter is. Say, okay, there's demand here most of the time. So, keep in mind, most librarians are woke, so they're going to be predisposed not to like this, but I have hundreds of libraries that have stocked my other books, so I think it can be done here.
All right. Well, if we can't take over the school boards, maybe we can at least flood the libraries with Don Jeffrey books.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Donald. Really appreciate you coming on my show.